People now take it for granted that government should be strong enough, big enough that it can dictate what kind of medicine your doctor can do to you, you know? If there's a doctor
Mm.
that wants to practice any form of medicine and he opens a clinic and he's helping people, what's the role of government in stopping him from practicing whatever medicine he practices? Traditionally, in all societies, it was the role of the free market to dictate that. If the doctor is giving medicine that's not helping people, people would just stop going to him. He wouldn't prosper. When the entire idea of centralizing money started, that's when the government started becoming so strong that they can decree and decide how people can live their lives. And one of the major points they decree and decide is what kind of medicine doctors can practice.
Hello and welcome back to Bitcoin for Professionals. Today we have a very interesting guest, Dr. Ahmad Ammous. Ahmad, how are you, doctor, today?
Hi, Ralph. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. I know you're busy, like all doctors. Your time is scarce. So we appreciate you joining the show today. Maybe you can give us a little bit of a background about your experience, your career journey, how you found yourself in medicine. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm an internal medicine physician. I work as a primary care physician in a hospital. I grew up, my dad is a physician, and he was kind of my role model. Uh, I, I just, I envied how his patients looked up to him and how he helped so many people. And I've always wanted to be a physician since I was a child. I came to the US for college. That's where I studied. And then I did my medical school in Lebanon. And then I came and did my residency in internal medicine here in the US, and I've lived here since.
Hmm. That's very interesting. And your father, I'm assuming he was also in internal medicine, or was he a different type of doctor? I'm just curious if you followed in his
Yeah,
footsteps.
he's a surgeon. He's a plastic surgeon actually, and he
Okay.
does mostly trauma and burns. Uh,
Wow.
I thought about doing surgery, but it's kind of it requires a certain kind of personality, and I figured that it's not my personality early in the game. So
Uh, You're not the first doctor to tell me that.
yeah,
When I mention plastic surgery, they're like, you have to be very different in the field of medicine as well. I know a buddy of mine, well, he's a distant cousin. He does plastic surgery in Canada, and doctors love forget that other people aren't doctors. And he's like, I can show you some cool stuff. I'm like, that's definitely not cool. I don't want to see it. I'm glad you're helping people, but it's not for everyone. You need a certain gut.
pretty graphic photos.
But yes, exactly. And so, like all doctors, you put in probably tons of hours to become a doctor. So basically, you put lots of hard work to get into the system. And then it seems like, you wanted to get out of the system as well. Is there a particular reason for that? I'm curious on what triggered you to make that switch because you practice medicine differently.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was in medical school, I always thought of myself as relatively healthy, but when I was in medical school, I read about the paleo diet, low carb diet, and I went on it, and I just became a lot healthier. I was happier, I had more energy, I had more energy to work out, and it was a complete transformation for me, and it was just simply cutting out processed food and sugar in my diet, and I felt immediately better. And at that point, I asked myself, so if this diet is making me feel so much better, wouldn't it also help these hundreds and thousands of patients that I see in the hospital that are so miserable? And that got me thinking, so why are pills the ultimate solution for any problem? Why do we never look at lifestyle and diet and other natural solutions to disease? And that kind of made me realize how the modern medical system is just controlled by pharmaceutical companies. And
Mm.
what we are taught to do in medical school, what doctors are taught to do, is only for the benefit of pharmaceutical companies rather than for the benefit of patients. And that's why I sought for an alternative from this system.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, uh, because you don't. verify. You just trust that this is the best form of medicine. This is the protocol we have to follow. And this is prevalent in other industries as well. So it kind of puts you in a box, right? You don't question anymore what you're being taught. Like I worked in traditional finance my entire life. I have a master's in finance. I started my CFA journey, and it took me 5 to 6 years to unlearn all of that because everyone else also puts pressure on you that you're crazy for questioning the system. So maybe you can tell us a little about that because you kind of unplugged from the standard protocol. How was it to kind of take a different path from a social point of view? How did your peers feel about it? If you can share, that would be great.
Yeah, it's very difficult. There were at many points that I questioned whether I am sane, and is it possible, how is it possible that everyone thinks that the system, nobody sees an issue with the system except me. And so I thought the issue must be with me. But I just couldn't stay silent anymore. I'd see these patients that keep coming back with the same complaint, and they're doing all the things that we're telling them. They're doing all the tests, they're taking the medications as we tell them, and they're still not getting better. But at the same time, I'm reading on like Facebook groups of people who are going low carb or fixing their diet, and these conditions are completely going away. And so it was very difficult. All my peers were, the thing with medicine is that it's so difficult to get into medicine, to get into medical school, that creates a level of indoctrination that's even more, that you have to be completely obedient to the system because you've
Mm.
worked so hard to get here. And he is, this guy who thinks he knows better than what they're teaching us in school. And so I was kind of like an outcast that way. And there were many points where I thought maybe I should just quit traditional medicine because I just don't agree with what they're teaching me. But I think I'm glad that I stuck with it because now I have the credentials to tell people that yes, I've been taught the traditional stuff, but I don't believe in it.
And that's fascinating, and I think we need a bit more people to have a stronger voice in all industries because that's the only way we can improve as a species and solve some of the problem. Similar to, one thing that COVID was really bad for everyone, mentally, physically, you name it. But there was one thing about COVID that I found very interesting. It unplugged a lot of people because the experts got it wrong. And they couldn't hide away from that fact. So a lot of people now question certain medical practices, whether it be diet, vaccines. It's like you do your own research, and then you make the decision based on your new understanding. But must have been a tough journey. Good on you. And I hope more people are being courageous enough to speak out against the system. So you unplugged. Maybe you can walk us through the type of medicine that now you recommend and that you follow. Maybe you can shed some light on the practices that you look at right now and share some of that with our audience. That would be great. I could use some of that. I mean, I've tried one thing I've noticed at least, and you can tell me you're the doctor. A lot of people are now pushing for carnivore diet, so high in protein, red meat, and fat. And in the past, even if I were to ask my mother now about red meat, she's like, no, don't eat that. That's cancerous. That's very dangerous. Don't have a lot of red meat. Maybe you can shed some light on the new medicine that you push and some details on that.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing to think about it is medications. Before I went into medical school, I used to think that medications were such a magical cure that, oh, maybe there's some enzymatic step that is broken in a certain sequence of chemicals, and that pill comes and replaces for it, and that's how the disease goes away. But no, it's not. It's not such a magic fix like that. What pills do is that they just hide symptoms. So if you have a constellation of symptoms and they label it as a certain disease, you go to physicians study in labs what sort of chemicals are causing these symptoms that you're having. And they design a chemical to stop those chemicals, your body from producing these chemicals. So you are no longer getting that reaction. You are no longer seeing that disease or those symptoms. But the actual disease itself is still there. the actual malfunctioning in the body is still there because you haven't solved the root cause of the issue. And the problem with pills is that they are causing you to get rid of these symptoms, but they're causing 1,000 other side effects.
Mm.
Okay. But what
Yeah.
actually helps people is looking at their lifestyle, seeing what are they doing in their lifestyle that's not adapt that their bodies are not adapted to. And how can we fix that? And how can we tailor it to that person's specific lifestyle, specific dietary requirements, specific way of living? And
Mm.
it sounds pretty revolutionary when you talk about it now, but that's how doctors worked throughout the ages. Is what are you doing that's poisoning your body, basically?
Mm. So you take it back to first principles. And what you're describing sounds very similar to, I'm relating it to what I've done with my life, work in finance. So you're describing more of an Austrian approach, bottom up, solve at the root problem. And for example, in economics, that's at the individual level versus at the macro level where, the central authorities say, okay, here's an injection, monetary policy, and then the symptoms of the economy disappear for a short period of time, and then they get worse over time when the cycle blows up, right? So I think that's fascinating. So you recommend basically people look internally at their lifestyle and solve at the root problem, whether that's through exercise, certain eating habits. So really more of a natural, organic, prehistoric approach to how we were originally as a species.
Yep. I mean, pills, as we know them, pills started in the early 1900s. So people
Mm,
have been living and been getting sick and getting better for thousands of years before that. So we
mm,
knew how to fix people before there were pills here. But unfortunately, the paradigm was taken over by people who push these pills and who benefit financially from it. That we have lost all traditional schools that taught anything that doesn't focus on pills.
yeah. And would you blame also the university system? Because a lot of doctors, like there's the journals, medicine journals, and it seems like a echo chamber where you can't really get something peer reviewed unless it follows the same trend. Is that a problem or catalyst to the disease of constantly popping pills of nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, medical journals in general are basically controlled by pharmaceutical companies. Uh,
Okay.
the journals only accept studies that are large enough to make a difference, like randomized controlled trials with enough participants and stuff. And the only people who are able to control to afford such studies are pharmaceutical companies. So all the
Mm,
relevant studies are coming from pharmaceutical companies. Uh, at the same time, what we are taught in medical school, that there was an entire push, deliberate push to change the type of medicine that was studied. And people who are interested in learning more about this should look into something called the Flexner Report. This was written in 1913, and it was this guy Abraham Flexner who had ties to the pharmaceutical industry and Rockefeller Foundation, and he came up with the thesis that all medical schools that did not teach pharmaceutical based medicine were not scientific and therefore had to be shut down. So 50% of medical schools in the US were closed down, and these were the
wow.
ones who taught, traditional methods of healing such as homeopathy, osteopathy, naturopathy. So any herbal treatment, any lifestyle-based treatment, any diet-based treatment, all of that education was overnight just became illegal. And
Wow.
and so from that moment on, all that medical schools was taught was pharmaceutical medicine. And because the US is basically the superpower of the world, this sort of model just spread to all over the world.
Mm. He sounds like the Keynes of medicine. basically.
Yeah,
He wanted to turn everything into formulas and science, make everything scientific, even though it didn't need to be scientific.
yeah,
But that's fascinating. So, if you were to describe, because so there's medicine in your definition of the term, and then there is fiat medicine. And do you think the money, the system, like the one we run on, fractional reserve banking, etc., has seeped through into medicine? So using the term fiat medicine, how would you describe fiat medicine?
yeah. I mean, you noticed how I told you the Flexner report was written in 1913, so it's around the time of the creation of the Federal Reserve, and people now take it for granted that government the government should be strong enough, big enough that it can dictate what kind of medicine your doctor can do to you, you know? If there's a doctor
Mm,
that wants to practice any form of medicine and he opens a clinic and he's helping people, what what's the role of government in stopping him from practicing whatever medicine he practices? Traditionally, in all societies, it was the role of the free market to dictate that. If the doctor is giving medicine that's not helping people, people would just stop going to him and stop paying his bills, and so he wouldn't
mm.
prosper. And that's how it's worked throughout history. Only in the beginning of the 1900s, when the entire idea of centralizing money started. When you centralize money, you give power to the authority that's controlling it, and you also give them the ability to print it out of thin air. And that's when the government started becoming so strong that they can decree and decide how life, how people can live their lives. And one of the major points they decree and decide is what kind of medicine doctors can practice. And
That's that's great.
yeah, and the result is where we live right now. And for most people, COVID was a wake up call to how broken the system is. I would say,
Mm,
unfortunately, I knew how broken it was even before COVID. I was not surprised.
mm. Yeah, that's so fascinating because similar names always come out, and the timing is always around the same time. Early 1900s, what's the common theme? Rockefellers, the Morgans, central bank creation, and then everything changes post that date. And it's funny because that's the moment where we've lost control of the money. And then the money is broken, and so the entire system follows and cascades as a result of that, because like you said, a select few control the majority of the power by having control over the money, and as such you're relying on the views and opinions of the select few to manage an entire society. But their views might be biased, even incorrect. So I find that fascinating. And you sound like you've gone down the money rabbit hole. And I'm curious about your views on Bitcoin. I know you're a Bitcoiner. You speak like one. The way you practice medicine is like a Bitcoiner. But when did you get into Bitcoin, and what were your original views on Bitcoin? I mean, you're very close to the Bitcoin standard, but I'm curious to get your views how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky. I was living with my brother Saifuddin Ammous, who is the author of the Bitcoin Standard, uh, when he was writing the book. So he was kind of going
Yeah.
down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. At the same time, I was kind of discovering how broken the medical system is. And we kind of lived together and we just talked about this stuff. And again, it's difficult to not make the connection of once the money became broken, everything else became broken. And
Mm.
that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it gives you hope that we can get out of this broken system somehow, and we now have the tool for it.
Yeah, because it sits right outside the system, not connected really to it in any shape or form. Was there something specific about Bitcoin that really grabbed your attention and made it click for you personally? Some people, they like the difficulty adjustment, the mining component, the fact that it's 24/7, 300. Some people have certain areas that they gravitated towards, and that was kind of the strongest value proposition for them. Was there anyone specific within the entire Bitcoin ecosystem that made a difference for you?
I think just understanding what inflation is and
Mm,
how crazy what inflation does to our lives. I think once you understand that, it clicked for me. I was talking to my father because my father did his medical training in Spain in the 1970s, and he told me that they would pay him 200, the equivalent of 200 US dollars at that point, a month. And those 200 were enough for him to live, and he saved some and sent back to his parents also.
wow.
But he was talking about my sister who we used to send her around 2000. She studied in the Spain in 2010, around 2010, and he would send her
Mm,
2000, the equivalent of 2000 US dollars, and it was barely enough for her to live.
wow.
So once you understand how what inflation is doing to our lives, that saving your money absolutely has no value anymore, and your money is constantly losing value. Once you understand that, you
Mm,
start to understand how destructive that is to your daily lives and your daily choices, and that's sort of what made it click for me.
interesting. Yeah, the fact that he can compare his life and then, his daughter a few years later. I mean, it's crazy. And I mean, a lot of the boomer generation fails to recognize that you had this salary, you had two cars, you had a family of three, a family of four, you owned your house, and you could save for a rainy day. Versus things started changing with the millennial generation mainly, where you know if you're lucky you can achieve that, but at least half of the millennials struggle to own a house, own a home, have a family. And as such, we've seen, birth rates decline over the years. I wanted to ask you, because your perspective on this would be interesting. Uh, what is the primary link between chronic diseases and the standard Western diet?
Yeah, I mean, the the best way to look at this is to look at societies that have not been touched by industrialization. And a
Mm,
fascinating person to look up is Weston Price. He is a Canadian dentist who traveled the world in the early 1900s before, the advent of commercial flight that we now know it. And he went and
mm,
looked at societies that were not touched by industrialization yet. And he noticed that, like, even in a certain community where some people have interacted with foreign trade and some that haven't, the ones that haven't were much healthier. He noticed the main thing he noticed was just their jaws, how good their teeth were. And all these societies that were not touched by industrialization, what he noticed is that the staple of their diet was always animal meat, some form of animal product, animal protein and fat.
mm,
He desperately looked for places where the diet was based on vegan or vegetarian principles, but he didn't find any. So the staple of the human diet was and always will be animal protein and fat. But the problem with animal products is that the margin of benefit for them is not as big as processed foods. Say like processed vegetable
mm,
seed oils, sugar, candy, cereal. That you can manufacture at such a large quantity and you can make such a profit margin because of them. So, how do you get people to buy all these products? Is that you how do you get people to abandon what their grandparents and their grandparents ate? Is you spread propaganda telling people that meat and fat are bad for them. And so the alternative is to eat all this processed crap that they can make so much money out of. And
mm,
this ties back into going back to the centralized process is because medicine is centralized, they are able to take control of, say, the journals giving dietary advice, the journals, the all the media outlets. These were controlled by people telling you to abandon your ancestral diet. And that has, unfortunately, twofold benefit for them. Is first of all, they're selling you the processed food, and that food is making you sick, and then they're selling you the medications to fix it. And it's quite an
Yeah.
ingenious model, but with disastrous effects on our health.
So the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry are actively working together. One of them provides the disease, and then the other one supposedly sells you the band-aid to fix that disease.
Mhm.
But like you said, they're not actively trying to fix it. What they're trying to do is suppress its symptoms, but deep down your body's just still ill. And that's something fascinating because when I went what I find fascinating when I look at the food pyramid, the one that they recommend, I'm sure you have a lot to say about the food pyramid because, when you were a child, your mother would look at it, or, on your cereal box, cereal was a huge. Maybe walk us through that, because one of the most nutritious items, eggs, is recommended the least. And I'd love to get your thoughts on the food pyramid because I find that one super
Yeah,
hilarious.
yeah. There are many factors how we got to the point where we are at the food pyramid, and with everyone you can kind of break it down and see what faulty studies did they use to get to that point, who's benefiting from where we are right now, and what are the disastrous consequences we've had because of it. And so the top of the food pyramid is saturated animal fats, which historically, if you look at Western prices work, were probably the healthiest and the most cherished foods our ancestors ate. And this is the
Mm.
pyramid that's telling you it's the least uh, food that you should be eating. And the entire craze with animal fat came, it was a lucky coincidence that it came around the same time that that industry produced processed vegetable seed oils, which are
Mm.
disastrous for your health. But how they managed to convince the public to eat them is that they linked saturated fat intake from animal fats to cardiovascular disease. So if you ask your parents now what causes heart attacks, they'll tell you it's animal
Yes,
fats, it's animal meat.
it's
All of this
butter.
propaganda, all of this propaganda was based on one study that linked the saturated fat intake for 7 countries with the risk of cardiovascular disease. This was called the 7 country study by this researcher called Ansel Keys. Ansel Keys, before he died, he told everyone, no, that study was wrong. And anyone who analyzed that study, you'd see that he omitted the countries that did not fit that model.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So it's a statistical blunder, basically.
statistical blunder, intentional blunder though. He had ties with the
Mm.
sugar industry and with the processed food industry. And so you had one faulty study that was linking fat intake with heart attacks. And of course, the industry jumped on it. And that's when the entire like fat free craze came up, that cholesterol is bad for you. Avoid animal fats, avoid butter, avoid eggs, and instead use vegetable oils, which are disastrous for your health. And so that's one major liar in this equation, animal fat. The animal fat model and the cholesterol model was also driven strongly by the pharmaceutical industry that were making statins or cholesterol medications. So
Mhm.
statins, the cholesterol pills, are the highest selling medications in history. It's the first drug in history to be prescribed based on a lab test, even if the patient has no symptoms or no complaints. And so if you talk to any random, like your uncle or something, you ask them what medications you take, and chances are they are on cholesterol medication. And this is disastrous because cholesterol is not only not bad for your body, cholesterol is actually important for your body, for hormone synthesis, for your brain, for your communications between your cells. And so it was a double attack from the food industry and the statin manufacturers, and we ended up with a disaster of heart attacks and heart disease that's only been increasing in number since all of these interventions were done.
That's that's crazy, and I can totally relate to that. As a Lebanese, 90%, if not more, of the Lebanese people take statins. When I was young, I was on the like high in cholesterol. It's hereditary, I guess. And I was like 22, and the doctor was like, "Oh, if you can't get it down in the next test, we're gonna have to prescribe you statins." And I don't like to take stuff, so I went on this crazy, psychotic workout regimen and really focusing. And I'm almost 40 and I avoided starting statins just by changing, like you said, my lifestyle and doing the right things and avoiding processed food and all that kind of stuff. I'm curious, you've said, I think, you'll find the cure in nature, not the drugstore. What does that look like in practice? Because it sounds amazing, but for someone listening, what would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, if we lived outdoors, if we lived, we were touching the earth every day, getting sun every day, our sleep cycles were normal, we're not exposed to artificial light, we're eating food in our natural environment that's grown at that time of the year, we wouldn't be sick. I mean, there
Mm.
are other problems with living in nature that, you might be eaten by a lion or might die of cold. So finding the balance between you need to be living a more natural way of living and also not being exposed to the elements that you're dying and freezing to death. So that's where the balance needs to be. And so the cures from
Okay.
nature mean like going outside and getting sun every day, eating things from your environment, avoiding processed foods, eating food in season rather than something that's grown half across the
Mm.
globe from you. These are all what heals disease. And if you speak to a modern doctor and tell them that I am able to cure diabetes just by looking at people's diet and lifestyle, they'll think you're crazy.
Mm.
And
That's that's sad, I have to say. Basically, your recommendation is let's live less like the modern man that's been defined and a bit closer to the primitive man, spending time outside, enjoying nature, the sun. So I find that sad because we're getting more and more kind of pushed into this living in a box environment. We already spend so much time in front of a screen. We're doing that right now. 9 to 5 work hours where you're just sitting there, your posture is being destroyed, you're becoming a sedentary species, and we were never like that. So you do believe that we have to stick to our primitive roots as best as possible, right?
yeah, I mean, it's a little bit tricky to do because you still have a job and you have an office to go to, and but there are ways to balance it out. There are ways to balance the light that's in your office. There are ways to go out as much as possible. There are ways to eat healthy, not processed, fresh foods, and that's where the healing comes from.
This sounds so. I'm curious because I love this. I try to do it myself. But let's say I came to you. I have, high sugar levels and the standard modern 38, 40-year-old man. I have health issues and they recommended pills and I'm trying to avoid that because I'm almost there. And I come to you and I tell you, okay, here are my blood tests. Here's how I live my life. How does the approach, like, I'm curious about your practice, the experience. What are the questions you ask? What is your process for helping people? Maybe you can walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the my model is to get people healthy, to get them off pills. But getting people off pills is not straightforward. These pills have side effects and have interactions in your body, so you have to go gradually. And the main thing is, let's look at your diet. What are you eating every day? What do you need to cut down on? What do you need to add? And also, a very important thing for me is the quality of sleep and the quality of light that you're getting during the day. So, for me, I recommend that people get at least 10 minutes of morning sunshine every day. So, be
Mm.
outside in the sun, uh, expose as much of your body, but even if it's just your face to the sun, as early as possible in the day. That's a no-brainer. That's a requirement. And the importance of the sun for our bodies is a lot more than just vitamin D. The the sun is necessary for activating your metabolism, for allowing the synthesis of important hormones and neurotransmitters in your brain. So my goal is to optimize that for the patient's lifestyle, depending on where they live. What do they have any dietary restrictions, any religious views, any religious restrictions, and their lifestyle? Do they work in an office? Do they work from home? All these things.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, your approach to medicine is, in a way, ironic because there's no one solution fits all. It's not like, okay, you have cholesterol, go take this pill, and we're done here. It's more about you have to kind of understand the puzzle of someone's life and figure out what they're doing wrong and shift them into that right direction, which I'm assuming is also a harder approach to medicine because you have to be more involved, you have to be more detailed in your approach. But that's amazing, Dr. Ahmad. Good on you.
Yeah, I mean
How would you solve? Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
again, the entire model, because it's pill based, they want to base each disease, like high cholesterol, you give this pill to. But what they don't realize is what causes high cholesterol is different for different people. What causes high sugar is different for each person. It's not just the diet, it could be light, it could be stress. And so there are a million things that could cause this particular symptom or this particular disease. And my job is to figure out which of these is contributing to the disease. In a
Mm,
centralized, number based, randomized controlled trial based, there's no way you can test these sort of hypotheses, because you want to just get everyone with high cholesterol and give them this pill. But
yeah. So it
yet
yeah,
traditional
it's very similar to. Oh, sorry, we're overlapping because of the lag. I'm
yeah
so sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
traditional forms of medicine, it was always you there's no standard approach. It's just what what is this patient's conditions, and based on that you give the cure.
Mm. Sounds so similar to how an Austrian would think, an Austrian economist would
Yeah.
think, which is individuals are different. You cannot generalize a solution at the macro level. That doesn't work that way. And they like to compare the economy to a living, breathing, dynamic being, not a straight line type of thing. So I find it so fascinating that in medicine there are these similarities with the economy right now. Because right now it's like, oh, inflation is high. Let's just increase interest rate, restrict the money supply, and then it doesn't matter what industry, what type of business, everyone gets the same treatment. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the businesses are beings as well. People within the economy are different beings. So I love that. I love that approach. How would you solve this problem? What would it take to get us back on you know a sound medicine standard? Do you think Bitcoin being involved in people's lives will have an impact on that? I'm curious to get your take. Like, what's your dream scenario? It can be 40 years down the line. I'm not expecting it to change overnight, but I'd love to get your views on how we solve this problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two ways that Bitcoin will fix this, and it's at the at the individual level and also at the larger government-based level. I mean, at the individual level, Bitcoin finally gives a platform for, say, a physician wants to interact directly with their patients and wants to get paid directly, doesn't want banks involved, doesn't want central authorities to be involved. So Bitcoin gives you that ability to pay your physician directly. Uh, a lot of physicians that have spoken up, say during COVID or before that, against the medical system, they've had their accounts frozen, they've had their money confiscated. So Bitcoin gives you a way out of this. And
Okay.
the more doctors start to wake up, the more uh, there are people that are going to be interested in these physicians, and then the more the patients would want these kinds of alternative thinking physicians. At the large scale, I mean, more and more of the world is going to start switching to a hard money standard like Bitcoin. And when we get to that point, governments are going to have to realize that they can no longer sustain their endless money printing and endless projects that are removed from the free market. They can no longer just keep funding their failed projects. And once we do that, then a lot of those strong authorities that are dictating what sort of diets we eat, what sort of medicine we practice, they're gonna just lose their power. And
Mm.
especially with the power of the internet, people are gonna hear what's actually working for people. And you have less and less of central authorities telling you uh, how you should treat your patients, and instead you're relying on reliable sources that you find online and that are getting feedback from people who are actually helping people. And that's just gonna, the old system is eventually gonna dissolve.
Mm. Yeah, I think the fact that now you have real freedom to transact will bring back what you touched on earlier, the free market. So now you can't just say whatever you want and just expect people to believe you because you're an authority, and then silence those that are speaking against your approach. Because people are going to see what works, what doesn't, and then those who are speaking truth can be transacted with. So they will be empowered to keep speaking truth versus, you know, 10, 15 years ago, before Bitcoin, before this huge internet, unraveling with social media, it was extremely difficult because people would just disappear overnight. They'd get silenced, censored, they would, shadow banned, etc. So I love that. I have a question. So this one is a very controversial one. Maybe not for Bitcoiners, but I think the problem starts when you just come out of the womb, because the vaccine issue really came into light during COVID. And more doctors started speaking about the vaccines. I want to get your personal take, if that's something you can talk about. What are your views on, the vaccine schedule? In the United States, it's extreme. There's like 40 vaccine within the first year. Where I am in the Middle East, it's much more restricted to maybe 7, 8, 10 vaccines that are kind of necessary. But it seems that things are changing. They're trying to bring what the West is doing, and there are talks about different vaccines being introduced. But I want to get your take as doctor on your views on vaccines.
Yeah, it's a very very controversial topic, and it's a very very important decision that every parent has to make. Uh, I'm not gonna tell parents what and what to not do, but what I will definitely tell them is that you need to do your own research. Don't just blindly follow what the pediatrician is telling you. I studied pediatrics when I was in medical school. When I went into my pediatrics rotation, I expected them to teach me a little bit about, oh, so why do we give this vaccine? When does this disease come up? How did this vaccine help solve this disease? But instead, all I was given was the schedule for when to give vaccinations to kids and just follow that schedule. So
Wow.
I don't know that much about vaccines. I had to read about it on my own. And
Mm.
if you do your own research, there's a lot of areas that are not addressed by centralized authorities of why we give these vaccines, why so many, why so early, and why are there no direct studies looking at vaccines versus against placebos. So these are all
Mm.
questions that not really my medical curricula or any medical curricula understands. And you have to go and do your own research and see what consequences it's doing to our bodies.
Yeah, and that's a very good answer. I like that, to encourage people to do their own research, because I have to say, uh, COVID really opened up our eyes because we were publicly lied to, like on television, and you're realizing there are consequences to vaccines, and potential side effects, and whether they're necessary or not, because they told us they were strictly necessary and now we're finding out they weren't. But yeah, I would encourage that, because we're expecting a baby, and my wife and I have been doing our own research as well, and there are certain things that you have to make a decision whether you're comfortable with some of the things you discover or not. So it's a tough one, and I wish there were more studies about it, like truthful studies. But I appreciate you sharing that. One question, we're getting closer to the end, but uh, the United States is a staple of chronic diseases. The level of obesity is very different than anywhere else in the world. And personally, I can only attribute that because they have the biggest food lobby, the biggest pharmaceutical lobby. How would you compare the, health, let's say, of your average American and average Middle Eastern person? Because that's where I'm from. Diet wise, habits wise, I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the major divide between the US and the Middle East is that we still kind of have a family-based society where your mom is cooking things she learned from her mom, and these traditions kind of stuck, and she still knows what fats to use, what things to pickle, what's the typical breakfast like, what's the typical lunch like, what's the typical dinner like. Unfortunately, in the US, they've gotten to the point where this was just completely taken over by the processed food industry, where people just do not even remember what their ancestors ate. So in the Middle
Hmm.
East, we still have some of that tradition. And you see people that live in villages in the mountains of Lebanon, they look better than the people that live in cities and are quote unquote
Yes.
westernized, and because they still eat what their ancestors ate. They still also have an interaction with nature every day. They go out in their fields every day. And so the US, they've completely removed the tradition from their diet. And also the US is very, very, very artificial light and artificial tech heavy. And
Mm,
the effects of blue light on our health is also something that takes a major toll on us. And this is something we maybe
mhm.
have a little bit less of in the Middle East, but it's catching up. So it's not
Yeah.
just,
And
yeah,
we have way more sun in the Middle
we
East
have a lot more
all
sun. Yeah.
time. So you get, and I think also our diet, Middle Eastern diet, is just traditionally just a bit healthier. And one thing I like to joke about, why it's extremely difficult to gain weight in the Middle East, because, like you said, families are still close and they will shame you.
Yeah, there's a
I
point to
mean,
that. There's a point to that. I mean, here you can get, yeah, you can make money online and live in your basement, and you don't interact with family, and you move out when you're 18, and that's your entire community is online. Nobody tells you what you're eating. Nobody looks at you, and that's had its value.
yeah. I mean, when I used to be in Canada and I'd go a bit more on the western side of things and gain weight, and then I'd visit Lebanon, I'd hear a earful of like, Shuhaida, you've gained so much weight. And then, I'd go back to Canada, work out and eat healthy to try to come back with a different image. So I know a lot of people hate that in the West. It's like, don't judge me. I'm comfortable with my body. But me personally, it's a check. Like my parents will, and my family and friends would be like, "What happened? Like, get back to what you used to be. You look better. You look healthier." And there's no shame. There's nothing wrong with gently shaming someone in our culture at least, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
there are consequences for your choices. Like you can choose to be fat, but understand that there are consequences for it.
Yeah, 100%. If you could implement as a doctor a health policy shift or some form of campaign, what would it be?
I think the main issue people now have is that they're spending too much time inside and not getting enough sun. So it would be a mandate to go outside and get sun every day.
That would be amazing if you can mandate people forcefully to spend 10, 15 minutes in the sun every day,
Yeah.
force them to do what's good for them. But that's amazing. And so we're at the mark, Dr. Ahmad. I think we've covered a lot today. For me, it was educational, and I hope it was also for our audience. I mean, what you're doing takes a lot of courage, and we appreciate that, at least on our side here. We make sure to let everyone know that, there are other people like us, Bitcoiners, who think similarly in the physical medicine field. And, because people, they're like, it's hard to find doctors such as yourself that will tell you things the way it is. And it's always nice to show that there are other opinions in the world. You can be an expert, but have a differing opinion to the trend. And sometimes that's where real value lies. In general, in everything, it's the contrarian that you have to pay attention to because they might be onto something that you're not aware of. Where can people find you? Where can people learn about your work, read about what you talk about? Uh, Please share.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a website, ammusmd.com. I am most active on Twitter, X, at ammusmd. And I have a newsletter that's free, and I offer online consultations as well for people who are interested.
That's amazing. We'll make sure to share everything we've learned today to our audience. I mean, we need healthy Bitcoiners too. Like the healthier the Bitcoiners are, the better the chances of us solving some of the main issues of the world, which is the money itself. Dr. Ahmad, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you so much, Ralph.